Constitutional Conversations is a series of discussions by America's leading scholars about the principles framing, ratification, and implementation of constitutional government in the United States. This series is hosted by the James Madison Memorial Fellowship Foundation, an agency of the federal government established by Congress to improve teaching about the United States Constitution.
That cast of characters that you string out in the title, Hamilton, Madison, Jefferson, Adams, I wonder, did you think about how to conjoin those names? You have them separated just by commas, but it occurred to me you could have said Hamilton and Madison, right? Co-laborers, as you pointed out in the writing of the new Constitution. Similarly, you could have said Jefferson and Adams, members of that committee of five who drafted the Declaration, but then in both of those pairs you have a falling out, don't you, afterwards? You could have said Hamilton versus Madison. You could have said Jefferson versus Adams. So would you be willing to talk a little bit about this cast of characters and why you selected them?
Well, first to the matter of punctuation, and not an and, not a but, not a with, not a versus. Precisely as you suggest, because Hamilton and Madison, they worked together to create this new Constitution. And at the time, I think they both believed that they were pretty much on the same page regarding what this new government ought to do. But it turned out that Hamilton had much greater ambitions for a centralized government and for the authority of the central government than Madison allowed. And Madison gravitates, during the course of my story, from being an arch Federalist, and Federalist in the sense of that group, I won't even call it a party yet, but that group that was in favor of ratifying the Constitution. It was as much Madison's handiwork, the Constitution was, as it was anybody else's. So this is his baby, and he's going to get it approved. But then he begins to have second thoughts about how this is turning out, especially when Hamilton jumps into the driver's seat in this new government. And so it was sort of Hamilton and Madison, but then eventually Hamilton against Madison. And something similar with Jefferson and Adams. And those two had worked in close partnership on the Declaration of Independence. But they became bitter foes by the end of my story. So in drafting a paragraph or anything, there's often a question, should it be this and that or this but that? And I've often concluded that the best way is not to use either, and just to list them.
Yes, I thought it was wise to use the commas after all.
The reason for these four is that, in the first place, I needed to wind up in my story where I have the Federalists against the Republicans, Hamilton, and it turns out Adams on the Federalist side, and then the Republicans led by Jefferson and Madison. And so I needed more than two people because of my complicated story, because writing the Constitution is one thing, and then putting the new government into effect is something else. And I needed it to be balanced on both sides. So if it's not going to be two, it's going to have to be four. Yes. Getting beyond that is going to be too many. But it allows me to sort of position George Washington around and above all this, because, of course, Washington fancied that he stayed above parties. And he did to a certain extent, although he leaned in the Federalist direction. I have written biographies, sort of standard biographies where you focus on one individual. I've concluded that that allows the writer, the author, me, to convey certain aspects of what happens. But one of the things that occurs when you write a biography is you cannot help but lend the impression to readers that the world revolves around your subject, because you have to keep coming back to your subject, and you're seeing the world through your subject's eyes. And even if you do your best to be fair to the opposite side of an argument, well, your guy always gets the last word, because he's the one you're going to carry forward. So I have written a couple of books where it's two people. I wrote a book about Abraham Lincoln and John Brown and their approach to dealing with slavery. And in this case, I just expanded the cast a little bit. And also, because they are They are characters who have distinctive voices. And one of the things that I try to accomplish for my readers, I do this with my students, is I try to get them to see the world of the past through the eyes of the people who were there. And so to the extent possible, and in some ways it's going to sound a little bit weird for a historian, but I sometimes think of myself almost as a playwright, where I've got these characters and I have them on stage, and I write the stage directions. Okay, you step on the stage, you step on the stage. But to the extent I can, I have them speak in their own voices. And these four are great in this regard because they were talking to each other, not always, and rarely in fact, face to face, but with their letters, they're responding to what the other people say. And each one has a distinctive voice. And the voice, to me, is really important in conveying the story because I do try to take my readers back to the time when all this was happening and to get to know these individuals. So one last thing on this subject. All those of us who do work in the colonial and early national period, we have an enormous debt to the National Archives and the work that is done to make the papers of the framers, the founders, available online. And this started years before COVID, but COVID accelerated things because, okay, we can't get into the libraries, we can't get into the archives. And so now it is a delight for a historian writing about this to know, okay, where did Franklin say this? Where did John Adams say that? And you can quickly pull it up. So it's all there. And I will say this that as well. I'm a writer of history, but I'm also a teacher. And so I cue my students in, you can do exactly the same kind of research that I did for this book. It's there. And I just show them, founders, the archive of the founders, and they just do this stuff. And so it has really democratized the study of history, the writing of history, in a way it's really exciting.
Constitutional Conversations is made possible by a generous grant from the Fairleigh S. Dickinson Jr. Foundation. Constitutional Conversations is made possible by the James Madison Education Fund.